Welcome along to the very first session of Digital Games Conference, where we're discussing the findings of a white paper from Boston Consulting Group into the state of the global games market, with a big focus on Saudi, which of course wants to be a global player in the space. With us, we have the team behind the research and Dr Abdulla AlSanaa, who's involved with the country's Game Changers program. Welcome, guys, and let's begin with a quick round of intros.
Chris. I'm Povilas Joniskis. I'm a partner with BCG. I am based out of Dubai, and I had quite a lot of our media efforts in the region. Obviously, a big part of that is gaming and esports these days, with the rise in it. And excited to be here. Thank you.
Good to have you.
My name is Farah Tamer. I'm a project leader with the Boston Consulting Group, also based out of Dubai. Part of the BCG gaming practice area, and maybe more importantly, a lifelong gamer. So a sector which is particularly important to me. Happy to be here.
Good to have you.
Abdulla AlSanaa. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Advanced Initiative Company, a video game company, and also a company that is working to develop talent and startups in video game sector in Saudi Arabia.
Okay, and before we get into the finer details of the paper and the research behind it, it'd be good to get a bit of an overview of the kind of the aim of the paper, what it was set out to achieve, and what the kind of overarching goal was, Farah.
Absolutely, Chris. So the objective of the paper was to take a comprehensive look at the entire ecosystem of the gaming and esports space. So looking at everything from the tech hardware, so producing the consoles, the platform, the PCs, and the mobile devices, all the way through to content production, that of making the games, distributing them, following on into the world of the consumption-driven adjacencies. So these would be, people beyond just playing the games, people enjoying things like parallel media, watching shows based on their games, going to experiential entertainment, theme parks, things like that are based on their game. And perhaps more importantly is the whole world of esports, which has kind of grown from that consumption side. And the idea was to basically look at what's happening in the world from the lens of the industry players within that ecosystem. So where is the money being invested? Who's currently winning? And then also in parallel, what are national governments doing to enable these sectors to flourish within their respective countries? And in particular, in focus in this paper was MENA. Of course, we looked quite closely at KSA and some of the initiatives that were being undertaken there. And that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, and Povilas, what were some of the kind of the key takeaways from this paper? What were some of the top line findings globally?
I think I wouldn't surprise anyone saying, the amount of attention that the sector is getting out of investors, out of governments, and out of the players within the sector trying to kind of claim their spots is already kind of pretty much unprecedented in media at the moment. Almost to the level where some of the people are even saying that there might be a bubble coming up when it comes to the valuation of the companies and so on and so forth. We believe that the growth is quite sustainable. We see quite a lot of the levers for that. The gaming consumption in general is growing. More and more players have grown up playing games, and obviously that expands the demographics, which we're looking at. Demographics are very well balanced between genders, age groups, and I think that's obviously very attractive for anyone to go into this space, whether they're there to tell their story with a game, whether they're there to advertise, whether they're there to just catch the audiences. But at the same time, obviously, there's quite a lot of different challenges to the industry. And when I say challenges, it's not about the industry having challenges to grow, but rather challenges in navigating there, because it is a very complex and a very dynamic space. You write a report one day, the next day, it is already outdated. We see a lot of shifts. We see a lot of importance going towards content importance. We see digital distribution has led to the point where every single game creator can now reach the audiences. They no longer have to go directly to the publisher, even though the publishers are still very important for the industry. We see professionalization of consumption of games, meaning esports. And also kind of secondary content creation, whether that would be Twitch or YouTube content that you do about the game that you enjoy playing. So quite a lot of very complex trends. And I mean, as Farah has mentioned, in every single value chain step, we see a potential for disruption. We see disruptors coming into the space, and I think that's what makes the industry incredibly attractive.
Okay, and with regards to Saudi, then, what were some of the kind of the key findings there, Farah?
So I think you need to take a look at it from the perspective of the consumption of gaming and esports versus the production of gaming and esports. And I think one of the things that was particularly clear to us from the beginning was, let's say, the passion that Saudi gamers have for the sector, right? It is one of the healthiest markets in the region, and in fact globally in terms of average spend per user. And what is surprising is that despite this overwhelming consumption and passion for gaming and esports, there's very little activity up until this date. Has been very little activity within the kingdom in terms of actually producing content, producing games, getting games to market, and so forth. Now, not to say that, on the esports side, there's a bit of, they've had some notable successes in recent years, right? You have the FIFA World Champion, for example, the FIFA E-World Champion, rather, Saad al-Dosri comes from Saudi. He's a two-time champion. Last year's female FIFA E-World Champion, Najd Fahid, another Saudi, right? So there's this continuous pattern that we saw that the Saudi population are quite enthusiastic and keen on the whole world of gaming. And what they had not been, let's say, that demand for gaming or that passion for gaming was not met with an equal amount of, let's say, productivity within that ecosystem. And then kind of just to play that story forward, what we saw throughout the report, throughout our work in the kingdom, was that indeed there's a lot of efforts ongoing to feed that demand, right? To localize and onshore a lot of the gaming consumption that's happening, and finding ways to help tell Saudi stories, to help bring the young Saudi developers who are just coding a little game at home, giving them the tools and the kit they need to actually bring their games to a major market. And I think Dr. AlSanaa's initiative, or the initiative that he's part of, Game Changers, was one of many that we learned about throughout our time there. I think one of the interesting sound bites that we heard throughout some of our interviews was when Game Changers was originally initiated and conceptualized, they had a modest number of seats in mind, right? They had a cohort size of maybe 50 or 60 individuals. When they opened up to receive applications, they were overwhelmed with how many people submitted viable, accurate, strong applications to be part of this program, resulting them, in fact, having to increase the cohort size, right? And I think that speaks volumes to not just the level of interest within the kingdom, but the capabilities and ability that people already have there that could be capitalized going forward.
Okay, and on that point, Dr. Abdulla, could you just go into a little bit more detail about the Game Changers program for anyone in our audience that might not already know about it? What is the kind of idea behind it? What does it set out to achieve? And how is it helping the next generation of Saudi game developers flourish?
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. This actually alludes to the point that the kingdom is an opportunity, and it is a diamond in the rough in terms of a video game development market. And Game Changers goes beyond the theory and the opportunities to the actual application of a program that is capable of ramping up talents to satisfy the gap in the market in Saudi Arabia. We're amongst the top 20 markets in the region and in the world. Actually, we are the 19th, and we have generated almost $1.1 billion in terms of revenue to the video game industry the last year, which means that there is a huge opportunity for Saudi companies to take a chunk of that. And if we just exceed to 30, 40, or 50% of that, that means that there is room for growth. In terms of only a video game development company, where there is also room for growth for video gaming content companies and esports companies and esports teams. Of course, massive efforts are being done by other agencies such as the Esports Federation, the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology. So AIC developed this idea of building an accelerated program where we bring apprentices to be mentored by the best in the world, ex-Nintendo employees, ex-Microsoft employees that have worked on actual games and have managed to publish these games to the market. And therefore came the idea of Game Changers. We signed an exclusive partnership with DigiPen Institute of Technology, the world's most renowned institute in video game development, and the first in the world actually to ever have a bachelor's degree in video game development. It was made up of ex-Nintendo employees that started from the headquarters of NST, which was the Nintendo Soft Technologies in Seattle. And 30 years from that day, They have 2 campuses outside the state of Washington, in fact, internationally, one in Singapore and one in Bilbao. And their effort now in the region has started with the Kingdom as the leader of the region and the main hub for the region. So we signed an agreement with the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology to launch this program. The program basically takes 2 phases, 2 major phases, the training and then the company or the startup phase. So the training is a 9-month period that's split into 3 major segments. The first is the introduction, the second is the academic training, and the third and the final is the production. And that leads into the funnel for the startup and the incubation, which is the second phase of the overall program. Now we started off Farah, we started off with 50 apprentices, and we thought there is a need for more to even satisfy the attrition in case there is any, because it's a very prolonged program, and we were afraid that we would have issues towards the end of the program with completing the needed number for the companies. And therefore, we ended up training around 100 for the first 6 weeks of the program. And then we continued with the 50, and we were surprised actually with the amount of talent that they possessed. And many of them now have reached halfway through the production phase, and they're almost, close to finalizing the first phase of the overall program, which was the training. And we have many student projects that are about to launch on the Android and iOS. We have played them. We have had our partners play them. We've had people enjoy them, and have had this as our major metric and KPI. If students, or what we call apprentices, were capable of pushing products as good as this with good quality and good polished outcomes in the market, that means that when they reach the incubation phase and they develop their MVPs, there is no fear that they would develop something that's commercializable, and as well as something that is successful. And inshallah, very soon you will start seeing that on the iOS and the Android and Steam, and you will be able to download them and test them yourselves. Because as AIC, we've always been observant to the programs that say we're doing 3 months video game development program, 3 months accelerated programs. These actually do not achieve anything. And because anyone who claims that they can teach video game development in 3 months can take literally head note from Amazon and Google with their massive video game projects that did not wind up becoming very successful because they attempted to do something with the, a long and prolonged duration. There is a need to build up capacity and talent, and I believe Game Changers is one step in the right direction. And if you only can see the massive efforts that are being done by government agencies and the central government to improve and add upon programs like and even better than Game Changers, it's something that's really, really honorable.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary, and I think the point you make at the end there about government involvement with the scheme is really key. And just to go back to the white paper, I know a lot of the research that was done around the various countries involved in the paper focused on how their sort of respective governments are getting involved with the country's gaming scene. I'll go to either of you, Farah or Povilas, just to discuss this in more detail. But how important would you say that involvement is, or how common is it?
So maybe I can take a stab at that, Povilas. So I think, look, a lot of, on the back of all this growth that we're seeing in gaming and esports, you're seeing a lot of nations around the world making commitments to their gaming and esports sectors and promising to invest and helping grow them. And I think what we saw through a lot of our research looking at all these nations, the kind of efforts that the kingdom is taking really do line up with what is best practice. I mean, beyond just the educational initiatives that we're seeing, like Game Changers, for example, they're not just stopping there. They're looking at all the other elements in terms of infrastructure, finding funding, enabling the regulation. So for example, things historically like game piracy or game approvals and licensing processes to get games accepted into the kingdom were previously very cumbersome and kind of complex processes that weren't exactly clear. The General Commission for Audiovisual Media in the kingdom recently undertook an effort to reform that whole process and to streamline it and make it a little bit clearer to publishers that, look, this is how you can get your game launched in the kingdom. This is how you can get it to the market here. Similarly, IP protection laws are something that's top of mind or top of agenda for the leaders of the country. again, ensuring for publishers and distributors that, look, your content isn't just going to be copied and uploaded onto a website for people to download for free, that indeed you're going to be entering a well-regulated commercial market in which you have a fair chance of competing with everyone. And then on the topic of infrastructure, I think this is perhaps where the biggest efforts were made, at least tangibly, that we can see to today. The Ministry of Communication and IT, exactly as Dr. AlSanaa said, they've really undertaken quite a lot of effort there. I mean, so for example, the onshoring of multiplayer servers, right? One of the biggest complaints that you hear from a lot of gamers in the region is that, look, we're connecting to a server in the UK or in the US, and the ping is just killing us. The lag is just ruining the experience, and it's inhibiting us from actually enjoying our passion. Well, the ministry has actually gone out and undertaken this effort to help bring those servers to the kingdom to enhance that overall experience. And these all, kind of intertwined. They set the table as these battery of enablers that will allow the sector to grow, right? To capitalize on the talent that Dr. AlSanaa was referring to. So I mean, in a nutshell, I think it's far and few to see a government really champion this agenda of gaming and esports. And what we've seen in the kingdom is some best practice examples of how you can go about doing that.
Sorry, Chris. Just to add to that, I think we're talking about the creative industry essentially, and the success of the ecosystem is linked to how many people actually feel like this is a lifelong profession for them. And for you to make that decision, especially if you're not, if you're slightly risk averse, it's all about how much support you can get and how many possible kind of, let's say, small step opportunities you see in getting into the space. And obviously programs like Game Changers and many others is essentially a way for you to start, right? Historically, what we've seen is publishers being that place where people would actually kind of professionalize their interest in gaming. But now with the way the market is changing, with the way of the mobile games actually driving majority of the revenues, it's very clear that it's going to be kind of small startups, small studios actually providing most of that. And obviously providing that support that you need to essentially make people feel like it's not some sort of a risky hobby that you're doing on the side. Rather, it's a profession that you can follow, is what makes ecosystems around the world actually flourish. And it's quite interesting also to compare that to, let's say, film. I think film industry has been supported by many governments around the world through subsidies and general programs, infrastructure provision as well. And gaming seems to be, it is lagging behind because it's a much newer industry, but at the same time, it's interesting to see that not all of the governments are following it at the same pace as they were, because it seems like the model is kind of clear. It's very clear how you can generate the positive GDP impact through it. It's interesting to see that not a lot of players have jumped into that. And it's also kind of refreshing to see that the kingdom is quite differentiated in that perspective.
Okay, and we discussed the kind of the grassroots movement there to get the next generation of developers into the industry and to kind of build up the companies in Saudi. But how important would you say it is, Dr. Abdulla, for Western companies or international companies in the gaming space to invest in Saudi and, I guess, potentially increase that recruitment market for the next generation of graduates in this space?
There is one thing that I always need to clarify is that big publishers and big companies are always a force of growth in the region, but there is an insistence on having a decent and an unmutated indie development scene that is sustainable, that is growing, there is potential of its growth. And that does not usually happen if we have major, let's say, video game development studios that are always, you can say, hogging up the market. And one of the things that we always felt as AIC, as a private company, is a challenge is that whenever they open, let's say, X company office MENA representative, they only do marketing and localization. There's no development. There's no core growth in that studio that is measurable to the talent that's around. And I believe that a program like ours and many others that will be feeding into the human capital pipeline of these companies, whether indie studios or major publishers and developers, is necessary. But they will only come if there is a human capital that can develop games that are as good of a quality as a publisher wants them, and even sometimes against regulations, and even if there were difficult and no incentives, they would still be around if there is a good foundation of human capital that they can exhaust and they can use for their students.
Okay.
I'll just add a point to that, Chris, if I can. Sorry. So
yeah, of course.
Just an interesting kind of anecdote that we heard from a few publishers within the kingdom. Actually, we were interviewing some of the publishers and developers that exist within Saudi, and some of them actually managed to have internship programs with major publishers in Japan, in the US. And funny enough, one of the problems that they had was that the interns that they were sending just weren't coming back. You know, they found this great job at a cushy publisher in Japan, and they thought, heck, I'm never going back, right? This is exactly what I want to be doing. And I think exactly as Dr. AlSanaa is saying, is if you can set the table for them to show them that look, there is an opportunity back home. There is an opportunity in the kingdom. You will find the support that you need in terms of infrastructure, in terms of funding, in terms of just guidance, right? I think that the advantage of having an incubator like Game Changers is you take gamers and game developers and people who maybe aren't particularly business savvy, but have a strong passion for this topic, and you help them bridge that knowledge gap and be able to take their idea and flesh it out into a full-fledged game and potentially a commercially viable product. And combined with that, I think one of the other, let's say, forces that we saw was this whole perception of gaming as a viable career, right? I think historically, you know, not just in Saudi, but indeed in MENA, we tend to be a little bit more focused on kind of traditional vocations, right? Go get your engineering degree, go become a doctor, so forth, right? And I mean, quite honestly, in the last 2 years, in my time working on gaming and esports in the kingdom, I've actually seen a shift in people's perception. It's gone from, you know, my parents would never let me do this to my parents are encouraging me to do this. And so it seems like all the seeds are there to really start this ecosystem and get this indie ecosystem off the ground. And I think it's just a matter of kind of pulling the trigger at the right time on all of these different elements. And it sounds like they're well on their way to doing that.
Okay, and on the subject of careers in gaming, obviously one of the big career paths now is esports, and the report obviously looked into the rise of esports globally and within Saudi. So what would you say were some of the key findings there in terms of the Saudi esports scene?
So look, in terms of esports within the Middle East, Saudi really is the leader, right? I think the Saudi Esports Federation, which used to be called SAFIS, the Saudi Arabian Federation for Electronic and Intellectual Sports, was rebranded to Saudi Esports Federation. They were established in 2017, and since that time, they've really championed the cause. I mean, they've organized informational seminars. They're organizing all the major events. They're really investing heavily in giving the competitive gamer within the kingdom the opportunity to make a career out of this. I think maybe a notable example of what Saudi Esports Federation has done was probably during the pandemic last year. They organized an event called Gamers Without Borders, which was a charity event, a charity esports competition, which managed to pull about 500,000 competitors from around the world. And they raised some $10 million in relief funds for COVID relief. And it's examples like that I think really set kind of the tone and begin to shape the change in the perception that, look, this isn't just a pastime. This is something that leadership is taking very seriously. And this is something that you've historically told your kids you're wasting your time. That's not the case anymore, right? That there's actually an avenue for you to take that passion and grow with it. I think I don't have the exact numbers on hand, but I mean, the Esports Federation, they have a fairly wide calendar of events that go on throughout the year. I mean, from the EMBS Cup, the E-League, they've got, all manner of different genres and titles that they put events on for. So it's really a multi-spoke effort from their end to help kind of establish esports as a viable career path for people within the kingdom.
I think it's important it's important to also add the importance of esports can be underestimated. Obviously, it gathers a lot of attention and some of the record-breaking audiences that could be compared to let's say legacy sports. But at the same time, if we look into the revenue line of it, it's still, let's say, a very small pie of what full gaming is. Having said that, we've looked into what importance does esports actually have on gaming industry, and it's quite surprising to see how much effect of setting the trends it has, because obviously we're talking about professionals that people follow, and the followership is very important in this space. What was an interesting, let's say, analysis that we've done is looking into the top 50 franchises in gaming over the past 50 years. And if we look into the franchises that have been launched in the past 4, 5, 7 years that actually make into that list, all of them have a very strong esports component. So it's very clear that the rise of esports is getting us to the space where if you really want to be, the leading franchise in the world, you have to have that component. And it seems like this will be continued for the future.
Okay, and with regards to esports, I know that one of the countries that was a big focus in the report was South Korea, which of course is a major player in esports. It's been in that space for more than anyone else. It's seen as a kind of a real world leader. How important would you say it is for countries like KSA, or any countries for that matter, to use that example as a blueprint for developing their own esports scene?
So obviously the learnings are there. I think you also have to be very careful when you go from one culture to the other. I think, what South Korea is exceptional is in terms of the, gaming cafe infrastructure that they have. This is a trend that has been there for 20, 25 years. And I think that also pretty much laid the grounds for competitive esports. Even though, internet and gaming cafes was a thing in the US and Europe, 10, 15 years ago when the typical broadband connection was not allowing you to play just simply from home. In South Korea, that trend stayed there. And it's essentially a way of, socializing, a way of it's a lifestyle. That obviously doesn't apply to the rest of the world. So obviously the ways of how you're gonna, pick up esports in different places is going to be different. And we're seeing that, all around the world. I mean, in certain areas, esports is heavily driven by PC and console. And historically, that was the way majority of esports were played. But obviously, now the shift is really going towards mobile. Just general kind of mobile gaming penetration is already more than half of the market. And obviously, more and more of that mobile gaming is becoming competitive. What's great about mobile gaming is it's very easy to access it. That means it's easy to access it from the price point perspective, which obviously allows developing markets to have significant esports populations, or significant parts of the population be interested in esports. And that obviously is a trend that is not that comparable to South Korea. At the same time, all of those trends are impacting, let's say, the leading markets, which in most of the cases are in Southeast Asia. So yes, there are learnings from that perspective. There are learnings on, government paying the right level of attention for professionalizing the sport. There's right models that you can look into, for example, the play to earn model, which essentially professionalizes esports. But at the same time, it's not, there's no silver bullet. I think every single country will have to find its own approach to it. And I think that's what's exciting about it. If we think about sports, it's also what excites us about, watching football. We see many different schools of thought of how you actually have to run that. And then we have World Cups to figure out whose approach wins. And we actually believe it's the same way, the way esports is going to develop. And, hopefully we're going to see some exciting World Cup events pretty soon.
Yeah, I like that analogy. And with regards to countries or teams finding their own way, how would you say Saudi's gone about doing that, Dr. Abdulla? How is the country kind of developing its own esports space? As someone who's there on the ground and seen it firsthand, what are your key thoughts there?
Well, many, like the Saudi Esports Federation is actually one of the sponsors for Game Changers, and they've been a close partner in the setup of Game Changers and the program. And Prince Faisal and as well as the CEO, Mr. Turki Al-Fawzan, were very involved in giving us insights as to what do we need and what the program should be looking like and what should we expect going into this. Because they are leading in from much more experience and knowledge about the market. So one thing they always as well looked into is the successes that they have managed to achieve. Like we've been to the Saudi Esports League and we've seen massive audience and reception. The Gamers Without Borders during the pandemic, the second version actually was the second iteration of the entire brand, was just heartening. Like, it was such a beautiful effort that was done for a beautiful cause that gathered a lot of let's say endowments that was spent for a great cause. So that was like, it's so encouraging for private companies to see a federation leading this effort, and that gets us going. And really, we rolled our sleeves and said we need to do something, and the government cannot by itself just launch this by initiatives. We need to take part and participate and do our let's say part in this, and that began with Game Changers, and there are many different projects hopefully in the pipeline for AIC, similar to Game Changers, and an improvement on it, and as well working on the human capital that has been developed through Game Changers.
I would just add one point to that, please, Chris. So just, we've spoken a fair bit about the efforts that the government has undertaken, and I think we're already beginning to see a little bit of kind of the rewards of that, if you will. So one of the big teams in the kingdom, Tueg Esports, we had the opportunity to speak with these guys, and I mean, as it was, we're talking to a group of gamers, right? I was surprised to learn and actually see it confirmed in the media about 2 months ago that they went into an agreement. They signed an agreement with a company called Pluck, based out of Europe. And Pluck, in short, it's a data analytics platform that looks to support player development. And again, it's a tool that they plan to integrate into their esports program to help upskill their talent. And so, again, this is a private team, right? This isn't a government-sponsored team or anything. This is a group of gamers that came together, started their esports team, and have actually managed to secure a partnership with another European private sector player who's helping them grow their performance.
Okay, and how important would you say these international collaborations are in terms of helping Saudi's gaming industry grow?
I think it's absolutely key, right? I mean, you go look at who's winning the big esports tournaments globally, and they tend to come from a number of countries you can count on two hands, right? And it's ultimately because the best players in the world are just playing against one another. And I think if we give the Saudi gamer population, the population of e-athletes within the kingdom, the opportunity to practice and compete against those professionals from those leading nations, you begin automatically to upskill them, right? You start bringing them up to that level of professional competition. So I think it's absolutely critical that we get those kind of partnerships in place.
And to add on this,
oh, sorry.
Just go ahead.
Go on. Okay. I think it's also kind of a general trend that we're talking about here. It's not just for esports that these interactions are very important. We talk about Saudi market being 1.1 billion, and we talk about let's say a lack of production covering that. But what we mean by that is not simply let's make sure that Saudis play Saudi games. It will not work this way. Gaming is very different, and esports is very different from, let's say, other forms of media where there's quite a significant domestic market every single time you're creating TV content, publishing, or whatever. Gaming is truly international. So when we talk about that, we're actually talking about the balance between it. In other words, you export the game for the world to play, and then you import other games to play in terms of just simply downloading them and being on the global ecosystems of those games. Getting your right share in that balance is, I think, what we're talking about when we talk about developing the ecosystems. And obviously, these type of interactions between different companies, one in the region, one outside of the region, is exactly what you want. And the same holds for games produced here, interacting with consumers all over the world, and essentially telling the story, telling about the culture. We've seen a lot of that when we talk about let's say Chinese games. I mean, there are so many history-based Chinese games, especially in the RPG and strategy field. Which are played all around the world, and this is how you learn about the history of another country, and same can apply to any other game or any other culture.
I think Dr. AlSanaa, I think you're going to jump in there. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I just want to say one thing is that from this discussion, one can interpret that there are many fronts that the kingdom is trying to improve in this effort, and I would argue that this is unprecedented. You have Esports Federation doing massive reform and massive changes when it comes to the esports ecosystem, and as well making the regulatory framework around that to sustain teams and to develop and to invite companies. You have the General Commission for Audiovisual Media that is looking into the piracy in the black market, the grey market, and trying to improve the ecosystem for partners to come from the outside. We have projects like NEOM and NBC, the joint venture that they signed recently that is now building on, capitalizing on efforts. You have the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology working on the infrastructure and human capital. You have the Ministry of Education working on vocational training. So this harmonious effort that is happening between government agencies is really indicative of a very healthy center of government that is looking deeply into the video game sector as not only a conduit for economic growth, but it also is a new conduit for the kingdom to share its story, which when it comes to partnering with other companies, when it comes to consuming games that we would be part of its development. Like, you guys have seen Assassin's Creed, you guys have seen Forza, you've seen many games that take inspiration from the regions that have invited them and the regions that have always offered an ecosystem that is inviting. So now the kingdom is opening up to all of those agencies. They're more than welcome. We're doing our small part as AIC, 2 employees. We welcome that some of the companies, like we know that there are less than 20 companies here in Saudi Arabia that are dedicated to video game development, and the hope is that they will grow, inshallah, very soon. It's baffling to me that Poland has 400 companies and Norway has 180 video game development companies, and Saudi Arabia is the leader of the MENA region and the biggest market in it, and it has only less than 20. So the opportunity is huge, and I was a doctor by profession, and I left that because because I know Farah mentioned something about being engineers and doctors. So I'm a living embodiment of the change into direction, because this has been my passion since I was young, and it has been part of my memories, my experiences since I could even remember. So I believe there's an opportunity to it. I believe we can capitalize on it. And like with the government giving this ecosystem to us and giving to the private sector to do its job, there is no excuse for us not to do anything, honestly.
And you mentioned the opportunities there. With regards to the report, Farah, going forward, are there any kind of key trends or any kind of other exciting prospects that we should be looking out for in terms of the findings that you came across?
So look, I think similar to much of media, content is king. If you have a story to tell and you can tell it well, it goes a long way. And I think games in general are particularly interesting medium because of how interactive they are by nature, right? I think that the beauty of things like Assassin's Creed is that you get to climb to the top of the pyramids. You get to jump off of Big Ben. You get to jump off of the Eiffel Tower, right? Like these are cool kind of experiences that are rooted in the real world. And I think, as Saudi increasingly comes onto the world stage and attracts all this foreign investment and foreign tourism and so forth, they're naturally going to want to tell these stories more and more. And I think from what I've heard, there's a lot of stories to tell. And I think gaming is the perfect medium to do that. I think the opportunity is there to really find that key content and put a really cool game mechanic on top of it and market that to the world. I mean, the opportunity is endless there. That would be my perspective, really, is that the stories to be told are really where the magic's going to happen going forward.
I think when we talk about content and storytelling, we don't just talk about creating games. There's also a massive trend of streaming the play that you have, and we're talking about competitive content, which is obviously esports, but also way beyond that. We're talking about kind of game walkthroughs. We're talking about just simple, almost comedian content when playing games. And that is on the rise. We look at Twitch, we look at YouTube, we look at the amount of, the share that content has on these platforms. It's growing very fast. So it's also a way for you to, first of all, make a living. Second of all, tell your story, because, a lot of the games are becoming more and more open. They're kind of complete open sandboxes. You can do whatever you want in them, and that allows you to take it as a platform to create content. And we've seen an outburst of that during the COVID lockdowns around the world.
Okay, and you talk about the subject of kind of content creation there. That's another interesting area. Dr. Abdulla AlSanaa, do you think that there's been a rise in the kind of supporting industries around gaming in Saudi in the last kind of year or so, whether that's sort of streamers creating content or non-endemic brands looking to get into gaming? Are you seeing more of a rise in terms of general interest beyond the traditional gaming space?
Absolutely. Like we've always been, like I personally have been enjoying offline gaming video content, and with Gamers Without Borders, for example, that was a huge effort towards a content that's supplementary to the video game industry. And I believe there's a huge opportunity now rising up for the localization effort for games that are going to be enjoyed by the Arabian region. There is a huge effort that is also being done by marketing. Like many companies in Saudi Arabia, Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony have been doing efforts with the launch of the PS5, the Xbox Series as well. We've seen these, let's say, adjacent and peripheral efforts being done, and as well we can see the growth on them with YouTube, with YouTubers that are streaming video game content and as well reviewing games. Finally, I always said we wanted a good and growing video game journalism and video game journals. We're seeing great effort being done by Saudi Gamer, by True Gaming, by IGN Arabia. They are looking into the market, and finally we're seeing Arabic review, games that are reviewed by people from the region, looking into them from the perspective of the region, and giving it to us to be enjoyed as consumers of the region. And that in itself is as well very indicative of a growing and a very highly potential market for to tap into.
Okay, and you talk about sort of localization there. One of the sort of big topics of debate at the moment is how far companies go with regards to making sure their games are sort of localized for the region. There's sometimes a bit of a consensus that perhaps publishers don't do everything they can, and that the Middle East is maybe a area of the world that's sometimes overlooked. Do you find that is the case, and is that something publishers should be kind of more aware of? Should they be doing more to make sure their games cater for the audience here?
I believe there indeed is. There are many challenges actually, because the Arabic language is not a very easy language to, particularly when wanting to localize menus, UI, and what have you. We've always been asked, can Arabic be, let's say, a left to right language, such as Japanese, because it's very different to that, because originally Japanese was actually right to left. And the other thing is that there is context. There's contextual knowledge that needs to be adapted. You cannot just translate the content from English to Arabic. There needs to be contextual understanding. There was a very famous examples where squid jokes that are made in Japan that are not recognizable to the US would be changed entirely. And that needs to have the developer involved, not just the publisher, but the developer himself or the team involved. Now, as EIC, we invest in small video game companies around the world, some in Europe, some in the US. And we've always been saying that once there will be a localization effort, we want to be there to learn, because I don't think that so far any game has been properly localized in terms of the overall context, not just the menu. But I believe that it's very justified, because there needs to be, I'm not going to say a government-led effort, but a trusted effort by companies that this entity will handle my game correctly. And whenever they ask for an adjustment, I'm going to be very sure that this adjustment is actually needed and will help increase its prevalence in the market.
Okay, and we're just kind of getting towards the end of our session now, so it'd be good to wrap up with a bit of a throw to the future and just get a sense from you guys where you think or where you expect Saudi's games industry might be in the next 5 years or so, whether that's kind of from the stuff that you're seeing on the ground, Dr. Abdulla, or whether that's the research that's coming out of this white paper. If I can go to you first, Farah.
I'm gonna borrow a line from Field of Dreams. If you build it, it will come. They will come, rather, right? And I think Abdullah alluded to a very interesting point about how places like Poland have got 400 development studios, right? And how did that start? Where did it come from? And in a lot of ways, there's often a keystone within those ecosystems. And in the case of Poland, it was CD Projekt, right? The makers of Witcher. And I think the existence of that keystone is coming in the kingdom. I think that, as Abdullah said, you've got 20 some odd developers working and they're on their way up. And I think it's only a matter of time before one of those really hits and grows and captures the world's attention. And at that point, I think the train will just start moving and the ecosystem will organically start to grow.
And Povilas, how about you?
I fully agree with Farah. I think I would also say, if we think about esports and the consumption content, meaning the streaming, these are also things that can grow in a much shorter timeline. So I do anticipate that, let's say, these parts of gaming industry will come to Saudi much faster, or the region much faster. Game development capabilities, they take time. I mean, CD Projekt was, started a while ago as well. I think we have to kind of give ourselves time as well. So it's a little bit of a game of, it's a marathon. We have to make sure that we do the right things. We learn from what other regions have done. We fix the mistakes that other regions have made, because there's plenty. And obviously that will get Saudi and Middle East on the right tracks. And then, as long as we give ourselves time, I don't see why the region, especially with the demand that we're talking about, and especially with the passion that the gamers have in the region, would not become one of the leading regions in the world.
Okay, and Dr. Abdulla, I'll let you have final say. What are your kind of hopes and aspirations when it comes to Saudi's future in gaming?
Well, I believe Saudi Arabia can and inshallah will spearhead the region into becoming a giant in the video game market. We have a lot of stories to be told. We have a lot of talent to tell these stories in good quality and good shape. There needs just to be patience and investment in human capital. Human capabilities are our main treasure, and I believe that giving them the capacity to tell these stories is essential. And we excel in everything and what we do. And if we're not leading something in the world, you will definitely find us having a plan, and that one day will be leading it. And this is just helps us wake up every day and just roll our sleeves and work. So just get to work. I hate telling people let's go pitch, let's do this. Just do whatever you can with the small efforts that you have, and this collective and aggregate of all efforts will definitely show, inshallah.
Now that's a really positive note to end on there, and a big thank you to the three of you for taking part in our session, and thanks to the audience for joining. I hope you all found it as interesting as I did. I think there were a lot of really insightful takeaways there, and I think we learned a lot. If anyone wants to see more of that report, you can find it in full on our website, and of course be sure to follow the rest of the conference over the next couple of days and to stay across all of our social channels for the latest.